It is time for today's edition of Elko Live here on KELK. I'm so happy to have today's guest in studio. I know I say that a lot, but honestly, every day with a new guest is just a real pleasure. And today, a real treat to have Jan Petersen, our local historian. Jan, thank you for taking time out of your busy retirement schedule, because you're busier than ever these days.
Well, I am overcommitted, as my usual MO is. But, you know, it's just fun to come and visit, and Lori and I never have an agenda. It just sort of rambles on and takes care of itself. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Jan. There's so many different things that we could launch into, but we do know that you're going to be conducting an Early Days of Elko history tour, and it's a walking tour. It's co-sponsored by Nevada Outdoor School and the Great Basin College Humanities, and it's set for August 24th, which is kind of a Sunday amble downtown, right?
Yeah, and Sunday evenings are a good non-traffic time to go. I've done a lot of kid tours, and you go in the middle of the day, and that works well. You know, as long as you don't go at noon or 5 o'clock, you're really in pretty good shape. And the corridor's slightly torn up now, which I was totally not thinking about, only vaguely knew. But we can work around that, and actually it means the traffic will be less to have 25 people roaming around downtown.
So the date for this is Sunday, August 24th, 5:30 p.m. You do need to register online, and there's one of the fancy QR codes, I think, that you can use your digital device and I don't know.
Figure your way through it.
Figure your way, yes. But do get registered. Find the details online, either through GBC Humanities or Nevada Outdoor School. But we'll just take a little bit of an amble, you know, and when you were talking about the downtown corridor being torn up, Jan, that's actually kind of where things got started, is downtown Elko.
Well, it was. Yeah. And as the Central Pacific is making its way eastward, they landed in Elko, you know, and they had the site prearranged and all graded and engineered and all of that stuff. They arrived December 29th, 1868. So we can technically say that we have been here since 1868, even though it's 4 or 5 days, depending on who you were and if you're really counting. And the first buildings were set up just to the west of where the post office is now. And they are building eastward to join with the Union Pacific, who was building westward. The whole organization joined together north of the Salt Flats at Promontory Point, May 10th, 1869. And if you ever get a chance to go up to, have you been there?
I have been in Utah, right?
It's in Utah.
Yes, on the Utah side, yep.
And it's just north, it's on the very north end of the Salt Flats, and it's an easy day trip out of Elko to go. You go up to Montello and through Park Valley and over that way, and they have reproductions of both the UP train engine and the Central Pacific engine, and they come out of their turntable every morning, and they're on parade, they're on display. And then every afternoon, then they go and they have a reenactment of the joining, and it's just, it gives you that whole physical picture of what it was like. And driving over to Snowville there, it gives you the actual experience of what that was like then.
Because it's still pretty desolate.
It's remote, you might call it. And actually, if you've got a fairly high clearance vehicle, you can drive. It's 87 miles from Lucin, which is just over the Nevada border into Utah. You can drive the actual rail bed. The rail bed was all constructed by, as 98% of the Central Pacific, by Chinese immigrants who were recruited by Charles Crocker, who was one of the big executives with the Central Pacific, to come and build the railroad. The Union Pacific had mostly, well, I don't know if it was mostly, a lot of employees that were former soldiers from the Civil War or the War of Northern Aggression if you're from the South. And they were, or Irish people that had immigrated over, but the West was not that populated to recruit employees. And there was a drought and harsh conditions going on in the Canton region of China, so these guys were recruited to come over and build. And they were very industrious. They were engineering geniuses on building these trestles. And even as you go across that top part of the salt flats, you can still see 160 years later these trestles that were made, cut and fill when you're building road beds. And it's quite the experience to physically see it.
And of course, that's talking about that promontory area. You said it's Snowville, right?
It's right,
Yeah.
it's Snowville, Utah. And the other sideshow that I didn't realize when you get there is we get Utah news. So we're always hearing about the rocket assembly plants over in the West Desert. Well, that's the place.
Oh.
So as you drive into Snowville and you turn south to go to Promontory Point, feel like the tourism bureau for Utah.
You kind of are.
We are.
For Nevada, yes, yes.
But Martin Marietta and Northrop Grumman have these rocket assembly plants there. And they've got show and tell of these huge rockets right out on display there. So you drive past those, which is pretty interesting in itself, and then you go 5 miles, 8 miles further, and you wind up at Promontory, Utah in 1869. So it's sort of the beginning of mass transportation and the present fancy form of transportation.
And speaking of the present, I guess if we fast forward, or actually we're going back right now in time, but talking about 1869, and Elko was a rough place, Jan. I mean, here's this quote that stands out. There were only 2 men killed this afternoon.
Well, and it was rough. They had, the government, Elko County, was carved out of Lander County March 6, 1869, the week before White Pine County was carved out there March 1st. And then they immediately set out to forming a government. The town was laid out from the Central Pacific people, but it was those first people that came in. There was a big surge of mining going on in White Pine County, Hamilton, Eberhart, Treasure City. So these guys would take the railroad as far as they could to Elko, and then they would get on a stagecoach, like the one in front of the Northeastern Nevada Museum, which really has a seating capacity of 6, with 3 sitting on a board in the middle. But they would have sometimes like 13, 15 people.
Oh, you're kidding.
Riding on the top or hanging in the boot and bumping along for 20 hours, eating dust, or in the winter you'd be freezing.
And you had to pay for that ride too.
And you got the privilege. And there were road agents, which were stage robbers.
Oh, okay. I was
Just
gonna
like
say,
the
were they-
classic Western,
Wow, okay.
where they would be hiding in the bushes, and they would take the Hamilton Stage Road. That's why it's called the Hamilton Stage Road. The end of the line was in Hamilton, 100, maybe 125 miles to the south of Elko. And you'd be bumping over all of these roads. And
Where were you trying to get to at that time?
well, Hamilton it's like 35, 40 miles out of Ely,
Oh, boy.
south of Highway 50.
But there was mining there.
And it was a huge, big mining town.
Okay.
Well, huge being 3,500 people. So these guys were, and they were opportunists. They were going to get rich quick. It was like those first people going to the gold fields in 1849 and 50. They were married men who'd left their families, or single guys that were going to go scoop up, what they thought they'd have a pan full of gold and be fabulously rich and live happily ever after.
And that wasn't happening. I mean, mining is hard, hard work.
Mining is hard,
Yes.
hard work, and
So that's why we had these businesses springing up in what is now downtown Elko in these tents, right? Because you could sell a drink or a plate of food or some other things to people.
going along, there was a great TV series called Hell on Wheels that was on the AMC channel.
Oh, I remember that.
And it was fairly accurate in the portrayal of what went on. As they're building the railroad, there's all of these stringers along.
A lot of violence.
There was a lot of violence, and there was just a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities. I had a great-great-grandfather who was a shoemaker. So he followed the Central Pacific along, and he would repair shoes.
Well, that makes
and
sense.
harnesses. So there were those type of people. And then there were these guys that, as they're leapfrogging along to establish towns, they would sort of go out another 10 miles and they'd set up these gambling tents or places that you could buy a readily made shirt or restaurant food. It was, and so then as they moved eastward, then those people stayed, some of them.
And that's when they became the merchants, and some of them, obviously, those traditions continued today. Those businesses grew. We have a couple of real landmark businesses, Anna Cabby's Elko General Merchandise. We had Reinhardt's for a long time.
Yeah, we had Reinhardt's who did follow the railroad construction, and when they got to Elko, which was going to be a section town, then they stayed. And what's interesting about those first mercantiles that set up, they were Jewish people. And they had gone to the gold rush, not to go stand in a nice cold stream with a pie pan, scooping up gravel to get color, to get gold, but to mine the miners.
Oh, very smart.
And that's how Levi Strauss went to California. And he was a peddler and peddled material and goods like that all up and down really what is now Highway 50.
So, Jan, some people might be newer listening and say, how did Elko get its name? And there's not really one story about that, right? I mean, is it, or do you think, okay.
Yeah, the most accepted story, and it's in an 1869 Elko Independent, which is the newspaper, as you well know, that was established in June of 1869. And it was early that summer that they're quoting Charles Crocker, who saw deer, and he was a city guy and thought they were elk. And he liked to name stations after animals. So he added an O to elk just for, Elko. It's a corny kind of stupid thing, but that's the most plausible and probably logical reason.
I know in this history book that you were a part of helping compile this. It was published by the Northeastern Nevada Museum and the Historical Society with the late, great Howard Hickson compiling it. You are the editor on this. There is one sentence in here that says, local Native Americans are credited, again, with the name Elko, but the Shoshone do not have the word Elko in their language. So just something that was said along the way.
That one's thrown out the window, too. And they look at you like, that's another made-up story.
We really should make an effort to find out what names they actually had for places. Because, I mean, no matter what, with the railroaders and the merchants and the freighters, they were not the first, because even before Christopher Columbus sailed, the Shoshone Indians populated our area, and they had a very tough life, but they were nomadic, what I understood. They migrated from place to place.
Yeah, they lived the seasonal round. Mm-hmm. So they moved from season to season and food source to food source. And it's documented that they've been here 10 to 12,000 years, possibly longer. These were because they lived in the isolated bowl of the Great Basin, they were so adaptive and intelligent and inventive. It was just, they lived a hard scrabble life. But yet, with that hard scrabble life, they were able to be very ingenious in the adaptation of survival. And they had a fairly well-rounded diet. They ate venison from deer and a lot of small game, ground squirrels and rabbits and stuff like that. But they also ate choke cherries and elderberries and the fruits that were, or, the berries that were around. So they probably had a more balanced diet than the European, we call them white people, that came through, which meant anything other than the natives that were around.
And they certainly experienced or developed the medicinal properties of the native plants too, which a lot of people are returning to some of that.
Sagebrush tea and the roots of those natural little Indians that grow, and all sorts of just the ingenuity of those people.
And you know what also...
And the artist.
Well, I was just going to say, that stands out for me. You were the first person to introduce me to the baskets and the basketry, and the baskets were purposeful. They were used to, make food and to store items, to transport. But the beautiful, beautiful basketry, and that they incorporated the art. And who would think that that was something important at the time, right? It's like, hurry up and get your basket done because we got to hit the road, right?
Yeah, and the burden basket that's conical in shape, it's, the early version of a backpack.
Yeah, you're right.
And they would take willows growing along the river, and then they would soak them and split them down. And good thing Antoinette Kavanaugh's not listening to me.
She would approve, wouldn't she?
Well, but she's got this, she and Leah Brady have it down to a science.
Oh,
and
yes.
I'm just the gringo watching. But they would take these willows and then they would soak them and they would process them and split them into like yarn type stuff. And they would weave them and incorporate different grasses and maybe a little red bud, whatever. They had that eye to make a piece of art out of a regular item.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so impressive.
It's just incredible.
Yeah. Talking with Jan Petersen. She's our local historian, and she has a very special Early Days of Elko walking tour planned for August 24th. Listen to me plan already ahead. August 24th, 5:30 p.m. Register online. There are a limited number, about 25 folks that should be along for the tour, Jan.
Well, and we'll start out at the Silver Dollar just because it's a central place downtown, and the Silver Dollar building actually dates back to the early 1870s as a bank. And it was operated for most of its life by the Henderson family. And then in 1928, they moved across the tracks. Remember, there's the railroad running through the middle of town, the Central Pacific. In 1928, they built what is still, all these years, decades later, the tallest building in Elko, the 4-story Henderson Bank building. And this is during the middle of the Depression and the middle of Prohibition. So I have a picture of a Safeway banner over that building. So at one point it was a Safeway, and
a grocery store.
Yeah,
on the ground
Safeway
floor.
Grocery store.
I was in the Folklife Center just a week or so ago, and that it was described then that there were 3 buildings or businesses, and that now they're all combined into the Western Folklife Center. But there was a Mexican restaurant in there when I moved here.
Yes.
So, but that could have been the grocery, right? Possibly, or do you think it was where the bar is?
Well, over where the Pioneer is,
Okay.
that was the Pioneer on the corner, and I'm going from when I was growing up. And then where the bar is now
Yes.
was a giant hole in the ground with a fence in front of it.
Really?
And then where the G3 Bar Theater is was Mel Hardware. The hole in the ground in the middle was a two-story building that in the late 1940s, when they were digging the basement for Mel Hardware, it compromised the building, this two-story building that had apartments on top and a dry cleaner on the main floor, on the street level. And it compromised that, and the building collapsed.
Was anybody hurt?
And a lady and little girl were killed.
Oh, how awful.
It was a sad story. Mr. Anacabby owned the building.
Oh.
And then they just...
What era was that then, in the 40s?
It was the late 1940s.
Okay.
After World War II.
Oh, so sad. Okay.
And you can still see, if you look at the east side of the Folklife Center, which was the Pioneer, you can see an outline of a building.
Okay. Well, no wonder the ghost stories abound at the Pioneer Hotel.
And there are, yeah.
There are ghost stories. That's another topic for October.
It's my one experience with a ghost.
Yes, you will have to come back for that. So I do want to make sure, too, that as people are listening along, I know we're jumping from, Native Americans to, prospectors, but Project Lifesaver, because I've been finding a lot of people who are new here, Jan, and they didn't realize it. Oh, wait, the railroad tracks did go right there in the corridor, parking
corridor. And actually,
corridor.
the California Trail ran right through there, too.
Oh, my gosh, yes. So it was in November 1983 that Elkoans celebrated the last train through town. Other towns all around the country tried to get this done, but we were one of the only projects like
and
this.
someplace in Kansas.
See, and even Reno, I was reminded the other day, Reno couldn't get it done, so they instead just lowered the tracks.
But that wasn't until 25 years ago. It was significantly later that they did that.
Yeah, so we were successful in moving the tracks. In hindsight, maybe rechanneling the Humboldt River wasn't a good idea, but that came along with the project
But
too.
it had been rechanneled before that.
Okay.
And my
Fair enough.
objection to rechanneling the river, and I know nothing about hydrology, but rivers just reseek their roots anyway.
It'll meander, yeah.
And I just wish it had been landscaped like the Boise River, or even downtown Reno has done a lot with theirs. And maybe someday down the road, the city of Elko will do something too, because it's got some wonderful potential and possibilities for park-type things. And that new ball field complex down behind the jail and by the hot hole, I love being down there. It is so cool. You've got the river meandering through to one side, you've got the railroad going through, and it's not disruptive. And the long-range plan for that whole area is quite potential and amazing.
Well, and I was thinking there were a couple more topics we could squeeze in today, but let's veer off to the hot hole, Jan, because that's another one that I hear people say, wow, why can't we go to the hot hole, or what's the history? Or there's a fascinating history of the Elko hot hole, right? The geothermal pond.
Oh, and it goes back in 1828, maybe the spring, maybe early 1829. One of the first fur trapper explorers that were in the area was Peter Skeen Ogden, who worked for Hudson Bay Company, and he was on his way to Wyoming to a rendezvous, and he was on a big exploration down the Humboldt, which he was very pleased with. He was trapping beaver. And the Canadian Hudson HBC guys, as my dad used to call them, and the Americans were fierce rivals. And they had this scorched earth policy. They were going to out-trap each other. This was way before environmental stuff came into being. But he mentions the hot hole, the hot spots down in the river where Carlin is, and the hot hole. So that's the first documentation of it. And then as the California Trail people started coming in 1841, there were lots of documentation and stories about them encountering the hot hole. And then when Elko was established in 1869, setting up business, a resort later bloomed really early in Elko's history. and the Hot Springs Hotel, and it was over sort of across from the hot hole itself. And there was a bridge right there called the Denver Bridge. All sorts of action went on there. Then just down, well, right where the flat is, kind of to the west of the new ball fields, in that cleared off area next to where there's residences there on Bullion Road. My dad, Tom Gallagher, all those guys used to talk about going to the Elko Natatorium. Isn't that the fanciest word?
What is that? Yes.
And it was one of those old-fashioned it was built, I think, just after World War I. And it was 3 pools, about as big as the Elko pools. And it had a pipe that ran from the hot hole, which was a lot higher then. And this pipe ran and filled the first one, and then it would run through, it was real low tech, and it ran into an equal size second one, and then the third one was a little kiddie pool that was really shallow. The 2 were swimming pool size with deep ends and diving boards and all of that. And my dad and Tom would reminisce about their mom taking them clear out of town, their mothers taking them out to the Elko Natatorium, and, like kids going to the pool.
Wow, and those are long gone.
And I can remember just seeing the big square empty pond,
Okay.
and the empty swimming pools. And it was people would take their cars out there, and it had little wooden bathhouses that you could change your clothes in.
Wow, and was it a public amenity, or, we don't have
Well, it was a private thing.
Okay, so
But-
you'd pay a little, I guess.
Yeah, you'd pay probably a dime or something to go in it. And that was Elko's first public pool.
Wow. And so the other thing because it was also in the vicinity when I first moved to Elko, and I worked for the Elko Independent. Lynn Anderson and I did a story. Looking back, maybe it was not the best front page story, but there was an old barn that was down there, and that was part of what was called the poorhouse.
Yes.
The reason I say it was an unfortunate story because the county stored a lot of records in there, and it wasn't very secure. And so as reporters, we went wandering through one day, and then we wrote a story about it, and George Boucher was not very happy with us. But
Well, and there were a lot of high school kids that would go meandering through. Well, then, let's back up. So it was built, it burned down twice, and there was the barn and the hotel itself, which was converted just after World War I think, and I've never really looked into it a lot. It was converted into sort of an indigent
like
place.
a poorhouse.
They
And
called
this
it the poor farm.
Poor farm. And it was before any social programs.
It was before any social programs, and it was sort of those, down and out cowboys that were all broken down
No
and had no
family.
families, or broken down old railroad guys. It was mostly men. And then when the ADA and all of that came into existence, this was in the mid-1970s, it was closed, and the manor, which is now the dorms for GBC, what few men were left, there were like 6 or so, were moved up to the manor. But then
They must have thought they were in a new century.
yeah.
That's
Well,
amazing.
and, they were old cowboys that rolled their own cigarettes and stuff, so
Yeah.
they thought these were pretty good digs. And then it became a sheltered group home it was the beginning of what Ruby's is now.
Oh, Ruby Mountain Resource
Ruby
Center?
Mountain Resource.
Oh, I did not know that.
They had a little thrift shop where Evergreen Floral is, but they had a group home for these guys out at the old folks' home.
Oh, wow, Jan. Fascinating. But it's all torn down now.
And then,
Yeah.
and then that closed, and then the county figured, whoa, this is a great place to store
stuff. And then when we did the front page story, they got mad and said, well, we're just going to bulldoze the whole thing. And they did. So, yeah.
But unbeknownst to me, and it was decades later, I've heard a lot of stories of high school kids who went roaming through there, and yeah.
And they didn't realize that they were combing through stacks of birth or marriage certificates and birth certificates from the 1800s.
Yeah, cool old stuff.
Cool old stuff to you and I.
Well, and the hot hole was, geez, our time's almost up. We didn't get very far.
We have so much fun, though.
The hot hole was surrounded in the old days with just a 3-string barbed wire fence. And it said, no trespassing. So I didn't go there because it said no trespassing, and I had heard numerous stories. In fact, when I was in high school some time ago, I knew of a couple people that had drowned in there.
I've known a couple people that have drowned in there too since then.
There were all sorts of stories. Sheriff Harris during Prohibition would throw his confiscated liquor in there, and every once in a while a sheep band would go in there, just all sorts of stuff like that. But I have since inquired of a lot of people, have you ever gone swimming in the hot hole? Because there's kind of a shelf that you can stand on.
Oh, and I'm going to just say, don't do this. Whatever Jan's going to say, don't do this.
Now it's firmly fenced off, and you have to go climb it.
You really would and could die,
But
yes.
several people, including some of my close relatives, said,
Took a chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've
Okay.
got.
You went swimming in there.
Apparently, I was the only one that didn't break the rule
Yes,
of climbing through the fence.
Of the 3 strands of barbed wire. So, oh my gosh, there's so much great history at Elko again. And Jan, the fact that you have these wonderful stories, we really do want to mention Bob Pierce, and of course, both your parents are now late, but they contributed so much to preserving this history, and that your dad, Bob, took you everywhere.
Well, my dad grew up with his grandpa. He was an only child, and his grandpa lived with him. And his grandpa had come in the early 1870s, so he did what grandpas do. He'd go out with them, and he'd talk about remembering wagon trains coming through and stuff. So my dad never knew any different. And as our oldest, Paul, says, look what he did to us.
Turned you all into rut nuts.
He turned us all into history geeks. And
yes.
I've got a son living here and a granddaughter who's interested in this stuff. And it's knowing these stories and keeping these legends and legacies alive, and everybody needs to know their family history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you have to know those things and appreciate those things so you can carry these stories on to the next generation and look back and learn from the good, the bad, and the ugly, and carry on where nobody's perfect and nobody lives a Ward and June Cleaver life.
But we can certainly learn a lot from this local history, Jan. Thank you again.
We have great stories. Every
really
community has got great stories to learn and share and teach the next generations of what everybody's got a story.
Well, we are going to definitely pick up the theme. And again, Jan's very busy in retirement from being the director of the Cowboy Arts and Gear Museum, but plenty of other projects. You write monthly for Everything Elko magazine. You have a column.
So fun.
That is fantastic. You're doing that with illustrative, there are photographs, historic photographs.
Yeah, thanks to the museum for sharing their pictures.
Yes, so that's the one plug. But I know you'll come back. You came in and filled in today, but that did not disappoint. I knew you wouldn't, because like I said, we could chat all day about this stuff. So thank you.
We have great stories to share.
Jan Petersen is our local historian. We appreciate your time, Jan, and we thank you, listeners, for joining us, and hope that we have inspired you to talk with your own family about your own family stories, and drive around or walk around Elko and join us on August 24th, 5:30 p.m. for the Early Days of Elko Walking History Tour downtown.